Let me just get right to this. I think we're at the most dangerous time in our political history in terms of the balance of power and the role that the media plays in whether or not we maintain a free democracy or not. You know, when I first started in politics, and have been for a long time and for many years, everyone on both sides, Democrats and Republicans, despised the press commonly because they were SOBs to everybody, which is exactly what they should be. They were unrelenting. They were, whatever the biases were, they were essentially, they were equal opportunity people. That changed in 1988. There's a lot of reasons for it. It began to change in the 80s. It changed an important point in the Dukakis election when the press literally was trying to, Dukakis-Bush, get Dukakis elected by ignoring what was happening in Massachusetts with a candidate who was running on the platform of he will do for America what he did for Massachusetts, and they were on the verge of bankruptcy. Also the change from evening news emphasis to morning news by the networks is another factor that's been pointed out to me. And then most recently, what I call the nepotism that exists, where people get jobs, they're married to people who are in the administration or in politics, whatever. But the overwhelming bias has become very real and very dangerous. We have a First Amendment for one reason. We have a First Amendment because, not because the Founding Fathers liked the press, they hated the press. But they believed, as Jefferson said, that in order to have a free country, in order to be a free people, we needed a free press. That was the job of the, so there was an implicit bargain in the First Amendment. The press being the only institution at that time which was in our process of which there was no checks and balances. We designed a constitutional system with many checks and balances. The one that had no checks and balances was the press, and that was done under an implicit understanding that somehow the press would protect the people from the government and the power by somehow allowing people to have the truth. That is being abrogated as we speak and has been for some time. And it is now creating, that is the danger that I spoke to this morning, just this morning, Gallup released their latest poll on the trust, how much trust, that Congressman made reference to from an earlier poll, when it comes to reporting the news accurately, fairly, and fully. And it's the highest in history. For the first time, 60% of the people said they had not very much or none at all. And of course, there was a partisan break. There were 40% who believed it did. Democrats, 58% believed that it was fair and accurate. The Republicans were 26, independents were 31. This contempt for the media, or this belief, and there are many other polls that show it. But I want to just use a few examples because I think we crossed the line the last few weeks that are terrifying. But a few weeks ago, I wrote a piece about, which was called The Audacity of Cronyism in Breitbart, and my talk today is The Audacity of Corruption. But what I pointed out was that it was appalling that Valerie Jarrett had a Secret Service detail, a woman in the White House as a senior aide, with a full Secret Service detail, including on vacation, and nobody in the press had asked why. That has become more poignant, as I said last week, when we discovered that we had an American ambassador on the anniversary of 9/11 who was without adequate security, while she still has a Secret Service detail assigned to her full time at a massive cost. And no one in the media has gone to ask why. Same thing, I raised the question of David Plouffe. David Plouffe, who is in the White House's senior advisor, he was the campaign manager last time. He and Axelrod sort of switched out. Axelrod going back to Chicago for the campaign. Just after it was announced that he was coming, an Iranian front group in Nigeria gave him $100,000 to give 2 speeches in Nigeria. Now, let me tell you, there's nobody no stranger gives you $100,000 and doesn't expect something in return, unless you live in a world that I don't. And no one has raised this in the mainstream media. He was on with George Stephanopoulos on ABC a couple of weeks ago, and they were going through all these questions. No one asked him whatsoever about that. He was not inquired. No, there's been no query. George Stephanopoulos, a former advisor to Bill Clinton, who every morning, while Rahm Emanuel was chief of staff, has his call with Rahm Emanuel, James Carville, and the three of them have been doing it for years. And he is held out as a journalist, has two platforms. I mean, he's a political hack masquerading as a journalist. But when you don't ask the questions you need to ask of someone like David Plouffe, who's going in the White House, when we're talking about Iran, I just finished surveys, some of you may have seen with John McLaughlin this week for the Secure America Now, just how strongly Americans are concerned with Iran, the Muslim Brotherhood, what's happening in the Middle East, and cuts in defense spending. And this is not the place for that. But it strikes me as the American people identify in the polling we've done over the last year as Iran is the single greatest danger to the United States. And here's a man who's being paid by an already named front group for a terrorist regime, and is not asked about it or queried about it. The third thing I would say is that, and then there's, of course, the Tom Donilon, who I know very well from years back, who I would cause a little bit of a stir a few months ago when I said he was the leaker in chief. This ridiculous running around, how did these secrets get out, when it is clear he is a person whose only has no credentials for foreign policy, who has been in the White House, who is a political operative for Walter Mondale, Jimmy Carter, and others, who is known to have, in my opinion, to be just the most amoral person I know in politics, and who is using and orchestrating national security. In Mr. Sanger's book, as the reviewer at the Washington Post said, the hero of this book and the clear source of it is Tom Donilon. But let me just make a point. Neither does, and I would say this to the congressman, all the Republicans have to do, I talk often about the corrupt party and the stupid party. But the stupid party couldn't be stupider when it comes to things like this. They could have called Tom Donilon and other people down to the Congress, put them under oath, and asked them if they had leaked. Instead, you have Eric Holder, who runs the most political Justice Department since John Mitchell. Only in John Mitchell's administration we had Justice Departments that were so politicized and so corrupted by politics. And he appoints someone who gave two people to do a study on the leaks sometime in the next century, will come out, and one of them was a contributor to Barack Obama when he was a state senator. That's a really unbiased source. And the press, of course, won't look into this. They will not ask the question. But the Republicans could have called them down. Yes, the president could have extended executive privilege, but let him say, I will not answer that question, sir, on the question of did you leak? These secrets that Dianne Feinstein, the Democratic chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, said were endangering national security and American lives. And as she said when she read Sanger's book, my God, every page I turn, I learn something that I don't know. I mean, these are serious matters, but they are in Washington, they're playful, and the press does not pursue any of them. Peter Schweitzer has done a study talking about corruption. 60% or 80%, he's close to 80%, I think now, of the money given under the stimulus to green energy projects, the president and this administration's great project, has gone to people who are either bundlers or major contributors to Barack Obama. But nobody says, well, of course, Republicans don't raise it because in Washington, they simply want to do it when they get back in power, so they won't raise it. And of course, the press doesn't because they are basically have taken themselves out of doing their job. When we see what happened this week in Libya, and when I said I was more frightened than I've ever been, and this is true because I think it's one thing that as they did in 2008 when the mainstream press, the mainstream media, and all the press jumped on the Obama bandwagon and made it a moral commitment on their part to help him get elected in a way that has never happened, whatever the biases in the past. And to give you an example of the difference, I'll just shortly tell you this. In 1980, when Carter was running for re-election, the press, even though 80% of them after the election reporters said they voted for Carter over Reagan, or 70%, was a very high percentage. After the press believed so much the Carter campaign and the Carter White House had abused the Rose Garden against Kennedy, that they made a commitment as they discussed that they would not serve as the attack dogs on Reagan for the Carter White House because they thought it was unfair and they weren't to be manipulated. I totally disagree with their analysis, but that was when you actually had a press corps, whatever their own personal feelings, they made judgments that were, we're not going to be manipulated. This press corps serves at the pleasure of this White House and president, led by people like Ezra Klein and journalists, where they plot the stories together. The problem here is that no one will name names, but I want to talk about this Libyan thing, because we cross some lines here. It's not about politics. If any president of the United States, first of all, we've had 9 days of lies over what happened, because they can't dare say it's a terrorist attack. And the press won't push this. Yesterday, there was not a single piece in the New York Times over the question of Libya. 20 American embassies yesterday are under attack. None of that is on the national news. None of it is being pressed in the papers. If a president of either party, I don't care whether it was Jimmy Carter or Bill Clinton or George Bush or Ronald Reagan or George H.W. Bush, had a terrorist incident and gotten on an airplane after saying something and flown off to a fundraiser in Las Vegas, they would have been crucified. It should have been the equivalent of, for Barack Obama, of George Bush's flying over Katrina moment. But nothing was said at all, and nothing will be said. It is one thing to bias the news or have a biased view. It is another thing to specifically decide that you will not tell the American people information they have a right to know. And I accuse right now openly, and this is, if I had more time, I'd do all the names for it, but the New York Times, the Washington Post, who are the most important papers that influence the networks, ABC, NBC, and to a lesser extent, because CBS has actually been on this story, partly because the president of Libya appeared on Bob Schieffer and said on Sunday, while Susan Rice was out, the UN ambassador has no portfolio in this matter. Lying instead of the secretary. You know why? Notice the Secretary of State wasn't out there doing this. Was on national television lying and promoting the White House line, while the Libyan president at the very same moment is saying this is a premeditated attack. Nobody has asked that question. This morning, take a look at the New York Times this morning. It's a minor reference. Oh, now we've decided there was a terrorist incident. But that would have changed, that should change the politics. I do blame it's not this is without accomplices, because the incompetence of the Romney campaign, which I said a week ago is the worst campaign in my lifetime. And the Republican establishment in general's inability to fight has allowed these things to happen, in part because they don't do it. But I want to go through two other quick points. Morsi in Egypt. The president of Egypt, we find out now that 2 days before, that his whole agenda has been getting the blind sheik, who's responsible for the bombings of the World Trade Center in 1993, out of jail, prison. I've been told specifically by a member of the intelligence community, the White House and the State Department negotiating that now. They have now come out and denied it. But it comes out that he's the head of the Muslim Brotherhood. The American people know what they think of the Muslim Brotherhood. They are against them 11-1. All right? And he's the president of the Muslim Brotherhood, getting $2 billion from the United States. He tells them that we had advance warning because they had said they were going to do this, to attack our embassy. The president, after the incident, after 48 hours, Mr. Morsi does nothing and says nothing. The president picks up the phone and calls him and demands they call it off. On Friday, last Friday, a week ago today, there was supposed to be a big demonstration. Thought that would be the big day. No, it disappeared because Morsi called it off. But no press person has investigated this. Just as no press person will go and ask the most obvious questions, which are when there are really good stories here, and good media stories, and good news stories, they are in the tank. And this is a frightening thing. Another example has been the polling, which everyone wants to talk to me about. Look, there is no doubt that Romney is blowing an election he could not lose, and has done everything he can to lose it. But the bias, the polling, it's very complicated. Some of it is error, some of it is miscalculation, but some of it is deliberate, in my opinion, to pump up the numbers using 2008 base to give a sense of momentum to the Obama campaign. When I have polls that have the preference of Democrats over Republicans higher than it was in 2008, which was a peak Democratic year, I know I am dealing with a poll that shouldn't be reported. And yet they are being done, and they're being done with that knowledge and with that basis for some people. And the answer is, as I said, some of it is incompetence, some of it is they just don't know what they really know how to handle it, and some of it is on purpose and is purposeful. But all of it is to serve a basic point, just as journalist was, Mr. Klein's journalist. But as I said, there is no pushback. We have a political campaign where, to put the best metaphor I can on it, where the referees on the field are sacking the quarterback of the one team, tripping up their runners, throwing their bodies in front of blockers, and nobody says anything. The Republicans don't. The reason you will lose this battle is for one reason. Despite organizations like AIM and others are pointing this out, and the fact that 60% of the American people are in on the secret here. I mean, they're no idiots. The Republicans and those candidates who are not the candidates of the press refuse to call them out. If I were the Romney campaign, I would have been doing this for months. I'd have been looking at individual reporters. I would be telling the American people, they're not trying to stop me, they're trying to stop you. And they are here to do this, and I would have made the press themselves an issue. Because until you do, what happens is they are given the basic concession of authenticity and accuracy, or that they are credible, by not doing that. Now, too many reporters, too many political people in the Republican Party in this town want to maintain their relationships with the press. This is how Sarah Palin got handed over to Katie Couric and to ABC before she was ready, because Steve Schmidt and others want to preserve their view, their relationships with the press. It's, people have their own agendas, and often it's not winning. But this not pushing back is a problem, and they don't do it. And you know what? This is a different era. The old argument, you don't attack someone with the press, because someone who you don't get in a pissing match with, someone who buys ink by the barrel, doesn't apply anymore. There are too many outlets, too many ways to do it, and the country doesn't have the confidence in the press that they once had. But all of what I want to conclude to this is that we face a fundamental danger here. The fundamental danger is this, as I talked about the Defense of the First Amendment. When the press's job is to stand on the ramparts and protect the liberty and freedom of all of us from a government and from organized governmental power. When they desert those ramparts and they go to serve to decide that they will now become an active participants, when they decide that their job is not simply is both to tell you who you may vote for and who you may not, but worse. And this is the danger of the last 2 weeks. What truth you may know as an American and what truth you are not allowed to know. They have then made themselves a fundamental threat to the democracy, and in my opinion, made themselves the enemy of the American people. And it is a threat to the very future of this country if that we allow this stuff to go on, and we crossed a whole new and frightening slide on the slippery slope this last 2 weeks, and it needs to be talked about. And so that's what as much as I can do in 20 minutes. So within we have a few moments for questions. Yes, sir.
I wanted to offer my interpretation for why this dynamic is happening. I'd like your reaction. I think that the media is working with the government because the government hands out so many freebies,
yes,
for market share, and therefore they have to work in sync with them in order to ensure that the good graces. And I think also the advertisers who generate the revenue for the newspapers are also getting those freebies, and so they can then influence the media.
Look, the corruption in this town is so great. Everybody in Washington seems to almost be on the take, with the exception of everybody in this room and this institution. But I swear to God, it's so the idea that I should get something. The reason when you have firms that have Ed Gillespie in business with Jack Quinn, who was the counsel for Bill Clinton and responsible for the pardon of Mark Rich, among other things, is because everybody in those people on K Street in both parties are about arrangements and money. Everyone in the press is. We have stimulus money being given. We have people who, as I said, the relationships when people are making contracts and their husbands and wives are getting it. Jay Carney's wife works in the government. Now he works. He was the head of the Time magazine. He was a liar then and a liar now, apparently. And nobody says there's anything wrong with this. And you're right, everybody's on the take here, and everybody's cutting out their stuff. That's why what used to be one of the best and most important things for the press, which was the investigative journalism of corruption and money, the stealing of the taxpayers, the looting of the treasury, isn't an issue, and why no one speaks of it in this town. Yes, sir.
Pat, just a quick question. Is it in violation, can it be seen as a violation of their charter for the major networks to demonstrate such obvious bias? I mean, does that violate their FCC license agreement?
Well, their license agreements only go to their stations. They don't really go to the networks themselves. But you see, that's why we're at this slippery slope. This is what scares me. Because you start saying, well, somebody should do something about this. My argument when I speak to the press is very simple. One day you're going to get my combination of George Wallace and Huey Long running for public office. And he's going to get up and say, he's going to point out how the press is going to get me, and let me tell you what they're going to say about me because they want to stop me. And he's going to say, you know what, we've gone too far with this First Amendment stuff. And we need to make them serve the people. We're sliding toward a system by establishing the fact that the press is, in fact, has prostituted themselves in the service of a political party or a political candidate. And once you go down this road and say that's happening, then people say, why do we need a First Amendment? Why should we protect them? They're not protecting us. That's the threat here. That's the danger that I worry about because we desperately need a real free press, whatever its faults, that protects the people. And soon they will be owned by the people. We're getting very close to that. Watching the coverage of this stuff in the last 10 days on Libya, and on the White and the press corps and the network serving as nothing but offshoots of the White House press office is really scary. And we're going to get to this question because that is down that road. These people are going to destroy freedom in America. I don't care about their partisan preferences. I care that in the end of the day, somebody's going to say enough of this. And somebody will carry the day, and that'll be that. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Incredibly good 20 minutes. I agree with everything you've said. I am very concerned about Romney's poor campaign combined with the media bias the way it is. Is there anything that Romney can do at this point?
Well, he should have been out there already. He should have been out there pushing back. And so should the Republican establishment. The Republican establishment, as I said in this town, I mean, they all there seem to be in the business. To me, a lot of the establishments getting a lot of money to line their pockets and not fighting or doing things that are effective. Why aren't they out there challenging this? But why isn't Romney himself getting up and saying the press is I'm running against two organizations. I'm running against the Democrats and the president, and I'm running against the mainstream media, which will not tell you the truth. Now, let me tell you something. You want to liven up some of your rallies? That'll do it. But they don't do it because this man dares to be cautious. And he's going to be dare to cautious himself right out of a race that was his to lose, and he's losing it.
One last question. Anybody? Go ahead. Are there no patriots in the media?
Oh, yes, there are. There are some.
Do they not see?
Well, the problem is, let me say this, because nobody raises the question. Because no one raises from the viewpoint that I'm raising it from. To raise it from the viewpoint where Republicans or conservatives, we don't like what you're doing to us, they dismiss that. What is not to be dismissed is what this is doing and what it is in terms of the specifics of challenge. These individual reporters, let me tell you something about the press. Reporters become reporters and don't enter the political fray because basically they can't stand the heat, is my experience. You ever watch reporters under attack in a public venue and so forth? They wilt like, they melt like ice on the equator. The fact is that they need to be called out. Their organizations need to be called out. That Ezra Klein still writes for the Washington Post. I mean, this is unbelievable. They had a secret operation, a group, journal group, online coordinating how they would promote Obama and how they would attack Republicans. I mean, and he's still there, but nobody calls out the publisher or the editor or whatever. There is no effort here, or call him. The fact is, if I were out there, if I were doing one of these campaigns, I wouldn't let one of these guys buy with anything. I would make the fact that the American people already expressed in the Gallup poll say, I would give them all the evidence that they need to confirm their beliefs. And I would change the dialogue here. But until that happens, well, you're going to have two teams, your whole team that has an echo chamber of support attacking you. How do you ever expect to win? Really? I mean, you can when it's the National Tide, 1980. We have a different press now. They have now made the decision they will control the political process. And they are serving with the hundreds of millions of dollars that the networks and the newspapers are in effect contributing an in-kind contribution to candidates in Democratic Party. That's a legal issue that I would have been exploring. I mean, I would begin to put the heat on. But the Republicans never said a word when Comcast, which bought out the administration, which owns the worst cable, they're my cable company in Charleston. They're just so bad it's not, I guess every cable company is awful. They're the worst. Buys a network, is allowed to buy a network. The Justice Department allowed this. No Republican stood up and said this should be stopped. I mean, really, you get what you asked for.